A rich CEO slammed the brakes of his car when he saw a little girl crying outside the hospital. He stepped out and gently asked, "Why are you crying?" She spoke just one sentence. And that one line shattered his world. It was a rainy Thursday afternoon. The kind that painted the city gray and made even the brightest lights look like they were mourning something unseen. Cars rushed past the hospital gates. People ran with umbrellas, and the scent of antiseptic mixed with the wet asphalt created a mood only a hospital corridor could amplify. Outside, near the emergency wing, a little girl barely 8 stood soaked to the bone. Her shoes were worn, soles torn open, and her trembling hands clutched a small, stuffed teddy bear. Its right eye was missing, the cotton had begun to escape from its seams, and its smile, once stitched, was now faint, almost ghostly. But she held onto it as if her life depended on it. Inside one of the black luxury cars parked at the red light, just outside the hospital, was a man named Adil Mira. The city knew him as the cold, sharp-minded CEO of Mera Enterprises, a tech conglomerate that spanned continents. Adil was the kind of man who didn't waste seconds, who fired employees for arriving 2 minutes late, and who had reporters waiting for hours just to get a single quote from him. He was the kind of man who built empires, broke competitors, and sat at tables with kings and presidents. His world was one of boardrooms, billion-dollar mergers, and decisions made with zero emotion. That afternoon, he had just left a conference with international investors. His phone buzzed with updates, figures and graphs. But as his car halted briefly at the hospital gate, his eyes were pulled, unintentionally, towards the crying girl. There was something about her that disturbed him. She wasn't asking for money. She wasn't even looking at anyone. She just stood there, as if her soul had left her body but her body refused to follow. Then, something unexpected happened. She walked straight up to his car window. She didn't knock, didn't beg. She just stood there. Her eyes, large, brown, and drenched in both rain and tears, locked with his through the glass. She slowly lifted the teddy bear toward him, both hands shaking violently. Adil frowned. "Drive," he told the driver, almost instinctively. But the driver hesitated. "Sir, I think she wants something." Adil glanced again. That look, that silence. It wasn't ordinary. The girl finally opened her mouth. Her lips quivered as if even her voice had been torn from her. "Please buy this," she said. Barely a whisper. "My sister, she needs surgery." For a second, the world inside Adil cracked. Not because he felt sympathy. He didn't. At least, that's what he told himself. He opened the door and stepped out, rain hitting his tailored suit, as if trying to wake the man within him that the world forgot. "Where are your parents?" he asked, kneeling slightly. "They left," the girl replied, not moving her eyes from the teddy bear she still held out. "I'm all she has." Adil stood frozen. People in his world didn't talk like this. They negotiated, manipulated, demanded. But this little girl, she had no tricks. Only desperation. "How much?" he asked, almost bitterly. She didn't answer. "I said, how much do you want for this old thing?" She looked at the teddy bear, then at him. "Whatever you can give. It's not worth much. But she's worth everything." It hit him hard. He didn't even realize he'd taken the teddy bear from her hands. Didn't realize he had reached into his wallet. Didn't realize the tears threatening to form in his eyes. He just stood there, wallet in one hand, stuffed bear in the other, heart pounding like it hadn't in years. He gave her a few thousand rupees. She didn't count, didn't thank him. She just ran inside the hospital, bare feet slapping against the wet floor. Clutching the money like it was oxygen, the driver finally spoke. "Sir, should I go?" Adil interrupted. "Just go." But as they drove off, something inside him wouldn't shut up. The silence in the car became heavier. His mind replayed that moment again and again. Her face, her words. That line, "She's worth everything." He tried returning to his world. Tried diving into his phone again. But the screen blurred. He stared at the teddy bear still resting in his lap, water dripping from its fur. He couldn't escape it. That night, he sat alone in his penthouse apartment, overlooking the city skyline, wine glass untouched, news muted, just silence, and that teddy bear. Why did it bother him so much? He hadn't cared when his own father died. Hadn't blinked when his mother's funeral was held during a board meeting. He had climbed mountains of success. leaving everyone behind. And yet, a little girl with a broken bear had shaken him more than any loss ever had. He called his assistant the next morning. Find out who that girl is. The one from the hospital. I want details. Her name, her sister, everything. It didn't take long. Money talk. Security footage helped. The assistant returned by noon. Sir, her name is Zoya, 8 years old. Her sister's name is Amna, 12 years old. Both were abandoned 2 years ago. They live in a shelter near the railway tracks. The younger one, Zoya, comes to the hospital often. Amna has a heart defect. Needs immediate surgery. Costs over 3 million rupees. The hospital's trying but no donors so far. 3 million. Adil had spent more than that last week on a business class flight for a board member's dog. Without thinking he got up, put on his jacket, grabbed the teddy bear, and left. When he arrived at the hospital again, he saw Zoya sitting outside the ICU, holding nothing this time. Not even hope. Zoya, he said softly. She looked up. Startled. Her eyes widened. You came back. He nodded. Where's your sister? She pointed through the glass window. Amna lay there pale, motionless. Wires connecting her fragile body to machines she didn't understand. I'll pay for her surgery, he said. Zoya stared at him, confused. I'll take care of it. Everything. But why? She asked, tears welling again. He looked at the teddy bear in his hand. Because someone once told me she's worth everything. Zoya broke down, falling into his arms, sobbing with the kind of relief only a child burdened too early can feel. That night, Adil didn't return to his penthouse. He sat outside the ICU the entire night. When the doctors came out at dawn, smiles on their faces, he finally breathed. Amna had survived. The surgery was a success. He left the hospital without saying a word. But Zoya would never forget him. And neither would he. Because that day, a man who had everything met a girl who had nothing. And for the first time in years, his heart beat for someone else. The sun was just beginning to rise over the city, casting an orange hue across the hospital's rooftop. The birds chirped with a calm joy that seemed to mock the chaos most people carried inside them. Adil Mira stepped out of the hospital with the weight of a night he hadn't planned, carrying a silence deeper than anything his boardrooms had ever known. The world still knew him as the ruthless billionaire, the man whose voice could make stocks crash or soar. But inside him, something had shifted. He didn't know what to call it yet, but it was loud, and it refused to be silenced. He walked straight to his car. The teddy bear, still damp, still broken, lay on the passenger seat. He picked it up, stared at its missing eye and sighed. Why did this thing feel more real than his entire life's work? He didn't have the answer. By the time he reached his penthouse, he was exhausted, but not in the usual way. This wasn't about lack of sleep. It was emotional. Soul deep. For the first time in years, he felt like a man, not a CEO, not a brand, not a headline. Just a man who had stood beside a little girl and felt her pain. He took the teddy bear inside, placed it on his expensive glass shelf, right next to his business awards. Somehow, it looked more valuable than all of them. His phone buzzed relentlessly, missed calls, emails, messages from partners and shareholders. But he ignored them. He sat down on his leather couch, closed his eyes, and all he could see was Zoya's face. That broken smile. Those eyes that spoke without a single word. His assistant called again. This time he picked up. Sir, are you okay? Everyone is asking. Clear my schedule, Adil interrupted. For the week. Sir, I said cancel everything, no meetings, no flights. Nothing. The assistant stammered, yes sir. Adil ended the call and sat still. The silence was no longer suffocating, it was familiar now. A friend. Later that day, he returned to the hospital, dressed not in his tailored suits but a simple shirt and jeans. No media. No entourage. Just him. When he entered the children's ward, he saw her, Zoya, sitting beside Amna's bed, feeding her soup with the care of a mother, sister, and protector all at once. Amna's color had returned. Her lips moved, whispering jokes only Zoya could understand. The room had no luxury, no glamour. But it had love. More love than Adil had ever seen in any of the homes he had built, or bought. Zoya noticed him and jumped up. Uncle, she said, running to him. She's okay. The doctor said she'll be fine. He smiled. A genuine one that felt foreign on his face. That's good. That's very good. And Amna tried to sit up, Are you the man who helped us? She asked softly. Adil nodded. I didn't do much. Zoya turned to her sister. He bought Teddy. Remember? For you. Adil chuckled. I still have him. He's safe. Amna smiled. Then you did everything. That sentence hit harder than it should have. He'd written billion-dollar checks, but this one act, the smallest by his standards, had changed someone's entire world. That evening, he went to the shelter home near the railway tracks where the girls stayed. He had to see it for himself. The place was heartbreaking. Cracked walls, rusted fans, overcrowded rooms, kids sleeping on torn mattresses. The matron in charge was kind but tired. Life had worn her down. We try our best, she said. But we barely survive on donations. How much would it take to rebuild this place? Adil asked without flinching. She stared at him like he was joking. Rebuild? Yes, proper beds, classrooms, a safe environment, everything. She hesitated. It would take more than we could ever ask. Adil didn't blink. I'm not asking for a number. I'm asking for a plan. Draft it. You'll have the money within the week. Tears filled the woman's eyes. Why? Why are you doing this? He looked outside where Zoya and Amna played with other children. Because no child should carry the weight of the world. Not alone. A news of Adil Mira's sudden involvement in a forgotten shelter leaked days later. Media outlets were stunned. Headlines screamed. Ruthless CEO turns humanitarian. Social media exploded. Some called it a publicity stunt. Others believed he was running for politics. But the truth was much simpler. He had found something worth more than reputation. He had found peace. He started visiting the shelter every few days. He brought books, toys, storytellers, doctors, and most importantly, he brought time, the one thing he had never shared. Zoya became the unofficial guide of the place, showing him around like he was the newest member of their small, chaotic family. One afternoon, while painting the walls with the kids, Zoya looked up and asked, "Do you have any children?" Adil froze. "No," he said after a pause. "I was always too busy." Zoya tilted her head. "Why?" He stared at the color in his hands. "Because I thought work was more important." Zoya nodded, as if understanding more than any adult ever had. "You can still be a dad, you know. You're kind. And dads are just people who don't leave." That single sentence shook Adil to his core. He went home that night and stared at the teddy bear again. All his life, he had collected things. Cars, properties, stocks, power. But he had never built anything that felt like love. Zoya had been right. Dads were just people who didn't leave. And maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late for him to become one. In the weeks that followed, Adil filed for official guardianship. The system was reluctant. "You're not married. You have no experience with children." But Adil persisted. "I built companies with nothing but an idea. I can build a home if you just give me a chance." It took months. Background checks, interviews, delays. But he showed up, every single time. And when the final approval came, Zoya jumped into his arms and said, "I knew you wouldn't leave." He smiled, holding her tightly. "Never." He moved both girls into a new home, not a mansion, not a palace, but a real home. Warm, cozy, full of laughter, full of life. The kind he never had, but always needed. Amna enrolled in school, her health improving every day. Zoya followed him around like a shadow, asking questions, giving opinions, making him laugh like he hadn't in decades. He started leaving the office earlier. Cancelled meetings that didn't matter. Began eating at the dinner table. Not the boardroom. On Zoya's 10th birthday he threw a small party in their backyard. No CEOs, no investors, just a few children, a cake, balloons, and the biggest gift of all. A perfectly stitched teddy bear with both eyes intact. Zoya opened the box, gasped, and hugged it tightly. "It's Teddy, he's fixed." Adil kneeled beside her. "You fixed me first. It was only fair." The guests laughed. The music played. And in that moment, Adil Mira, once feared, once hollow, was just a father. A man who didn't leave. A man who finally understood what it meant to be rich. Not in money, but in love. Life had taken a strange turn. Adil Mira, once a man defined by boardrooms and billion-dollar deals, now woke up each morning to the sound of a child's laughter. Not alarms, not stock updates, but Zoya's excited voice yelling, "Uncle Adil. Breakfast is ready." That small voice had become the heartbeat of his home. A home that was once cold, empty, and quiet, now transformed into a space of warmth, love, and chaos. Amna had returned to health. She now went to school regularly and often read bedtime stories to Zoya at night. These two sisters had brought life into a place where only silence once lived. Adil hadn't just become their legal guardian. He had embraced something far deeper. Responsibility, fatherhood, a second chance at life. His daily routine had changed. Meetings were no longer his first priority. The office had adjusted to his new rhythm. Mornings were now filled with breakfast conversations, spilled juice, and Zoya asking questions that made him think more than any corporate pitch ever had. "Uncle Adil, will you take us to school today?" She'd ask, her eyes wide and hopeful. And without a second thought, he'd nod. Because nothing, no investor, no deal, mattered more than her smile now. One day after returning from school, Zoya came running into the living room holding a crumpled flyer. "Uncle Adil! There's an art competition next week. My teacher says I could win if I have the right colors." Her excitement lit up the room. Adil stood, grabbed his keys, and smiled. "Then let's go get them." At the art store, Zoya walked past the fancy supplies, ignoring the giant kits and expensive items. She picked up one small box of colored pencils. "Just this?" Adil asked, surprised. She nodded. "It's enough. I don't want more than what I need." That sentence, so simple, so powerful, it shook him more than any business loss ever had. She was only 10. Yet wiser than most adults he knew. That night, he sat on the couch and looked at the teddy bear, still resting on the shelf. He thought about all the years he had chased things. Money, success, status. He had spent decades building skyscrapers but never knew what it felt like to build a home. Now, Zoya and Amna had taught him something he never learned in any boardroom: the power of being present. And then came a call. The volunteer from the shelter home spoke with urgency. "Sir, a new child arrived today. He's 5. Lost both parents in a car crash. No family. No one to take him." Without hesitation, Adil stood up. "I'm coming." When he arrived, he saw the little boy sitting in a corner. Arms wrapped tightly around his knees, no tears, just silence. His eyes held fear, abandonment, and confusion. Zoya gently walked over to him, crouched down, and held out her hand. "My name is Zoya," she said softly. "What's yours?" The boy whispered, "Ali." In that moment, Adil realized something deep. This story wasn't just about Zoya or Amna. There were thousands of children like them, all around the world, crying quietly, waiting for someone, not rich, not perfect, just someone who wouldn't leave. Adil stepped forward and knelt beside them. "Ali," he said, "how would you like to come home with us for a few days? Just until we figure things out." The little boy looked at Zoya, who smiled and nodded. "It's safe," she whispered. Ali hesitated, then slowly reached for Adil's hand. That tiny act broke the last wall inside him. Ali didn't say a word in the car ride home. But he kept holding Adil's hand tightly the entire time. That night, he fell asleep on the couch, clutching the same teddy bear that had started it all. Zoya gently placed a blanket over him and whispered, "He needs you now too." Adil didn't sleep much that night. He sat watching them. Ali asleep, Zoya humming a lullaby, Amna reading quietly nearby, and thought, what if this is what I was meant to do all along? Not build tech empires, but build lives, heal hearts, create homes. The next morning, Adil called the shelter. "I want to sponsor a full-time program, education, therapy, nutrition, for every child under your care. I'll fund it. Just make sure no child is ever left feeling like they don't matter." The shelter director was stunned. "Sir, this is unheard of." "Then let's make it heard," Adil replied. Weeks turned into months. Adil's house was now filled with laughter. Crayon drawings on the fridge, soccer balls in the hallway, and midnight snacks that involved more sugar than any doctor would allow. But it was real. It was love. Zoya started winning art competitions. Amna began writing stories about kindness, and Ali, he spoke more now. He laughed, and every night, he hugged Adil before bed and said, "Thank you for not leaving." One evening, as they all sat in the backyard under fairy lights, eating grilled corn and telling silly jokes, Zoya asked, "Uncle Adil, what did you want to be when you were little?" He paused. No one had ever asked him that before. "I don't remember," he admitted. "I think I just wanted to be someone who mattered." "You are," she said. To us. That night, he looked in the mirror and saw not the billionaire, not the CEO. But a man who had found his purpose not in contracts, but in connection. One weekend, the school organized a family day. Parents had to come dressed as their child's favorite character and perform a small act. Zoya, of course, chose her favorite. You're going to be the teddy bear, she said, because you were broken too. But you helped fix us all. He laughed. I'll need a costume, she nodded, mischievous. Don't worry. I already made it. So there he was, standing in front of a crowd of laughing parents and curious children, dressed in a giant teddy bear costume, pretending to roar and fall over. It was the most ridiculous, and the most beautiful thing he'd ever done. At the end of the performance, the principal handed him a note that read, "Real heroes don't always wear suits. Sometimes, they wear fur and carry children in their arms." That night, as the kids went to bed and silence returned, Adil stood by the window, looking at the city skyline that once made him feel powerful. Now, it just looked distant. Behind him, Zoya whispered, "Uncle Adil." He turned. "Yes, promise me you'll never go back to being the old you." He smiled, knelt, and held her hands. "I promise. That man is gone. And I'm never leaving." She hugged him tightly. And in that hug, he found everything he had ever searched for. The seasons changed. But the warmth inside Adil Mira's home only grew stronger. What was once a cold, silent penthouse in the sky, had become a home filled with breakfast conversations, spilled paints and the innocent giggles of children chasing each other through the halls. Zoya, Amna, and little Ali had become his entire world. Not just dependents. Not just responsibilities. But his family. The kind he never had. The kind he never knew he needed. Adil now spent his mornings helping Zoya pack her school bag, reminding Amna not to forget her lunchbox, and tying Ali's shoelaces while the boy hummed songs he made up on the spot. It was chaos, it was loud. It was unpredictable. Exactly what his soul had once longed for in silence. Gone were the days of towering deals and ruthless acquisitions. Now, he measured wealth in bedtime kisses, tiny drawings taped to the fridge, and the sound of children calling his name not out of fear, but out of love. But beyond the walls of his home, Adil was becoming something else too, an example. The media had initially mocked his transformation, calling it a PR stunt or a temporary midlife phase. But when they saw him month after month, returning to shelters, speaking at adoption forums, and building free education centers for orphans, something shifted. The world began to believe. Other CEOs followed, not for headlines, but because Adil had unknowingly sparked a movement. The Mira Foundation became a beacon of hope for children who had none. Within a year, he had launched 7 homes across the country, each one focused on love, safety, and a second chance at childhood. Still, Adil never let the spotlight blind him. His real moments of victory weren't at conferences. They were at school plays. Zoya playing the lead in a story she wrote herself about courage. Amna winning a science award and dedicating it to the man who gave me a second heartbeat. Ali, standing in front of the whole class and saying, "I want to be just like him when I grow up, someone who stays." One night, after dinner, the kids gathered around Adil with serious expressions. Zoya was holding something behind her back. "Uncle Adil," she said, "we have a surprise for you." He raised an eyebrow. "Should I be worried?" They giggled and handed him a box. Inside it was a brand new teddy bear, this one carefully stitched, both eyes intact, and wearing a small suit and tie. "We made this together," Zoya said, "to remind you of the day everything changed. The day you bought our old teddy bear, and ended up buying our hearts too." Adil was speechless. He hugged all 3 of them at once, the bear squashed between them. "You didn't just change my life," he whispered. "You gave it meaning." Years passed. The kids grew taller, wiser, and stronger. But their bond with Adil only deepened. They still ate dinner together every night. Still talked about everything. And Adil, though still respected in the business world, was now remembered most for being a father, not just to 3 children, but to a generation. One day, a young reporter asked him during an event, "Mr. Mira, what made you stop that day outside the hospital? What made you buy that teddy bear?" He looked straight into the camera and said, "She wasn't asking for money. She was asking for help. And for once in my life, I decided to listen. The clip went viral. But Adil didn't care. He was too busy teaching Ali how to ride a bike. Too busy proofreading Amna's college essay. Too busy attending Zoya's first art exhibition. Too busy being a man who finally knew what mattered. And every night, before he turned off the lights, he'd look at the teddy bear on his shelf, the same one that started it all, and smile. He had once been the richest man in the city. Now, he was the richest man in the world, because he had something money could never buy, a home, a family, and a legacy built not on power, but on love. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of a moment in your life, or taught you something about kindness, then don't just watch, share it. Tell us in the comments if anything like this ever happened to you. And thank you for giving your precious time. Please subscribe the channel.